right. Hey, and there it goes. So, I know these FBI Live videos are always a little bit awkward at the beginning because, we're checking to make sure that they work, and then there's a bunch of dead air. So, bear with me. Um, Looks like this is properly actually set up. I'm going to try and make sure that I can see ongoing comments on this thing as we go. Let's see here. I believe I can do that. Let me see. Howdy, folks. Just going to make sure I can actually see comments. If anybody's watching right now and wants to fire a comment off, let's just make sure everything's working okay so that I can ensure that I see what you're saying. All right, good deal. Let me see if I can make sure that if anybody's watching right now and wants to fire... I don't want any volume on my iPad. I just want to be able to see the comments. There we go. No, I don't want you to use... Anybody's watching right now and wants to fire a comment off. Let's just make sure everything's working okay so that I can ensure that I... Yeah, shut up. See what you're saying? All right, good deal. Let me see if I can make sure that if anybody's watching right now and wants to fire... I don't want to hear myself on an infinite loop. There we go. Sorry, just making sure I can see these comments in an easy way. That's, come on. Come on. Technology. It's lame. My iPad's being a butt. Come on. Come on. There we go. All right. All right, there we go. I can see comments. Fabulous. And I can see what I'm doing. Theoretically. There we go. All right. Folks are in. We can see stuff. This is actually working. The last time I did one of these, it was with the old Facebook interface, so they made sure to change everything in between. So I was a little worried this wasn't actually going to fire off. But it's working, and I can see you all. Hi, Mandy. Allison, JS. Hi, Avon. Susan, you're all there. I can see everyone. Fabulous. Okay, so we're rolling. The purpose of this Tech Talk and Q&A is to be able to, at the outset, we're just going to go over kind of some common techniques for ensuring that the audio that you provide for an engineer for your audiobook recordings is going to be clean and good and useful, and they're going to be happy with you at the end of it. Beyond that, we'll open it up for questions. We'll talk about any technical thing that you want to talk about, but we're going to kind of start there. And it's kind of my expectation that there's kind of like a wide range of experience here, people who have done 100, 200 books and people who are just starting out. I know there's a lot of new narrators. So we're going to start on the simple end of things, and then we'll kind of work our way up. The other thing I know is that everybody's got different DAWs. I'm going to be demonstrating things in the DAW that I use, which is Adobe Audition, but most of it should translate. And I'm going to try and talk about general things first. So big picture, I kind of want to talk about like goals for audio. So everybody's going to be at kind of like at a different point technically in their journey as an audiobook narrator. But it's good to have like an end goal in mind. So here's mine. My end goal for raw audio and audio production is always to provide audio that is at a point where all they would really have to do is master it and they could be done. Like there's nothing in it to fix. There's no weird noises. There's no strange clicks. There's no cutoffs. There's no errant breaths. If they just ran a mastering stack on it and walked away and came back, even the front and end times and the chapter spacing would all be fine. And that would be all that they would need to do. So that's kind of my objective when I'm sending audio to a publisher or rights holder. That's what I want to do. Obviously, that's for raw audio. If you're doing full production audio, then that's all got to be done. But for the purposes of Pink Flamingo, we're talking about raw audio here, stuff that you're going to send in, that an engineer is going to touch, and that's ultimately going to show up on Audible. So what I kind of want to do is kind of list some of the basic, kind of like the common issues that show up in audio, and then talk about how you can tackle those. And why don't I go ahead? We're just going to record something while we're doing it here, right? So, you know what? Let's do this as an actual punch and roll recording. Why don't we? I'm going to open up a session here. We'll store something here and we'll call it test. I'm not seeing any more comments come up, so hopefully they're still actually functioning. I like to believe so. And Facebook isn't just pranking me. Oh yeah, there's new comments are coming up. Good, we're still alive. All right, so my expectation is that all of you are punch and roll recording. If anybody's not, feel free to let me know in the chat. But my expectation is that everybody in general is doing punch and roll recording because that's, I assume, what Sarah would like to receive from you as a raw audio. But with that assumption, there's a couple things that are kind of common issues with audio that is provided for engineering. And those issues are usually going to be either background noise, buses going by, traffic, people stomping around. They're going to be really loud or erratic breaths that are distracting and have to be edited by the editor. They're going to be mispunches, punches that happen like in the middle of a breath and are distracting when that happens, or at the end of a line. And those are kind of some of the original, the main kind of like problem areas I think that people run into fairly often. So I want to talk about those a little bit. Let's start with background noise. So I'm going to record something here. Let's do it as just a waveform so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. If you are in a space that has a lot of noise, if you don't have a good isolation setup, or if you're near something that's commonly noisy that you need to be aware of, or if your neighbors just happen to use the lawnmower all the time, and you're aware that this is a problem that impacts your audio, it's often hard to tell that's a problem unless you're wearing headphones. So I know that there's all sorts of thoughts on whether people should record in headphones or not. But if you are aware that you have the potential for ongoing noise, wearing headphones is the way to make sure that you deal with that, because nobody wants to be cleaning that up on the other end. I mean, ultimately, you want to give audio to the engineer where they don't complain about you. Apart from just providing a good product, you want the people that you're working with to be pleased with the audio that they receive. And if they have to clean up this stuff, and if there's dogs barking and lawnmowers and garbage trucks that you weren't aware of when you recorded, they're not going to be really happy about that. So, first things first, if you are aware that this is the case, I highly recommend that you record with closed back headphones. If it's not a problem for you and you find that headphones impact your performance or whatever, fine. I don't really want to get into a debate about that. But if you are aware that it is a problem with your audio, be in a position where you can tell that it's happening while it's happening instead of later, and you discover that something awful was going on, or that the Blue Angels were flying overhead and you just didn't happen to notice, and that it's really corrupted the audio that you're providing, because nobody wants to deal with that on the other end of the production pipeline. So, if you have audio that is already recorded and maybe these sounds have crept in, there are ways to deal with those, but ideally you want to take care of this stuff upstream so that you're not messing around with it after the fact. I'll show you kind of what's the best way to show you how this looks. So I'm just gonna record a little bit of audio here. This is Adobe Audition, and what I've got up at the top is the waveform view, which is probably what you most often see. You're seeing your actual waveform as it's going along. And what I've got down below is called the spectral view. Now, some DAWs have the ability to do this. Audition does. I know there's a plugin for Reaper to do it. I think there's one also for Audacity to do it. There may be plugins or the facility to see this view in other DAWs, I don't know, but you can also see it in Isotope RX, which we'll talk a little bit more about, because this is also something I think is important. But you can see here, this is basically a frequency display, And everything on the bottom side of it, hopefully you can see my little cursor wiggling around, is low frequency, and everything up here is high frequency. And a lot of the noises that are problematic for narrators are low frequency noise. That's going to be airplanes, lawn mowers, children tromping around your house. Those are going to show up as low frequency noise. So I'm going to zoom in here. You see that? This is low frequency noise. And if you were looking in something like Isotope or anything else that has a frequency display, this is what this looks like. It's this very hot, low frequency thumps. And if you're doing it with something regular, like, here, I can actually make you do something regular here. I'm going to turn on my fan, and we'll do this again. Let's show you what a fan looks like. Let me really boost it up. See if I can get it up to jet sounds here. Just a second. Takes it a second to warm up. Let's see if it gets loud enough. You see it? You see how this purple is heating up down here? This is not a super low frequency noise, but it's a repetitive noise. And you can see kind of this sort of repeating pattern element to it. So things like lawnmowers and stuff like that are going to look like that. Now, I have on my interface a mild downward expansion that pushes these things down a little bit further during recording because I use an Apollo. If you are not using something like that, this is actually going to be considerably hotter looking than it does here. But you can see that there's started this buildup of low frequency noise. These are the kinds of things we care about. Now, I don't know how much I need to get into this. If you already, I'm assuming for the sake of argument that everyone has gone through like a sample submission in here so that you're not in a position where flutter echoes and stuff are a big problem for you. But that's one of those other things that you want to make sure is okay. I don't want to devote a lot of time to that because I'm not going to tell you how to treat an audio space in here, but that's another one of those things that's kind of going to pollute your audio that really you can't do much about further downstream. If that is an issue for you and you want to talk about it later, we can totally do that. All right, so noise. If you've got headphones on and you're seeing this noise, you just need to wait for it to pass. And then you go back and you punch in and you keep recording. But recording with this sort of noise, if the lawnmower going by, the garbage truck, the whatever, the dogs, you leave that in, you're leaving a lot of work for an engineer, and sometimes it's not resolvable. Sometimes it's in the middle of a phrase, there's nothing they can do about it, and it's really just a lot of somebody else's time that they're not going to appreciate spending. So if you have noise issues, use closed-back headphones, be aware of these noises when they're happening, stop, and don't record them. Avon's asking, what's a flutter echo? So if you go into your bathroom and you snap your fingers or you talk and you hear that sort of, that really tight echo, that's kind of a flutter echo. It's the sound bouncing back in an untreated space, that is really, really apparent. One way that you can test for this is by snapping your fingers. I'm snapping my fingers in here and it's kind of dead. It's almost like your fingers are moist when you're in a well-treated space. But if you go into your bathroom and you snap your fingers, it sounds like a gun went off. Anyway. All right. So another, I think, common issue, it's usually just the result of flutter echoes are the result of a very poorly treated space. The snap test is a nice way to quickly check. You know, if you go into a coat closet and you snap your fingers, it sounds really dead. But again, presumably most of the people here have gone through a step where you've provided some sample audio that ensures that you don't have a space that's that poorly treated. So hopefully that's not a problem for anybody here. Did I say moist? I did say moist, Lori. I knew you would pick up on that. All right. Next up, let's talk a little bit about breathing, because this is another thing that chews up a lot of editor time. And I want to talk a little bit about how you can deal with that. So obviously we all breathe, and removing your breaths is not what we want to do as narrators, because it sounds unnatural and you sound robotic when you remove breaths. So we all got to breathe. There are various techniques that you can use, both in terms of how you punch and then how you choose to breathe, that can minimize this so you don't end up in a position where you have a lot of slash breaths or big heaving breaths in between phrases. Slash breaths are those little quick breaths that sometimes people do right before they go into a sentence or immediately after a sentence. They're those really sharp inhales, and they're really distracting. So we like to minimize those. Also, especially with newer narrators, there's often kind of a tendency after you've read a really long phrase and you've used up all your breath, and you're going to go into the next phrase, to do this huge inhale because you didn't breathe anywhere during that long phrase, and now you got to get some juice back. So, detected dropped samples. Mike asked, detected dropped samples. I assume that just means for the stream. Is that what we're talking about? I'm not sure. So I'm going to load up a test here. There's kind of two things that I advocate as far as breathing. One of these is it's just a matter of experience. Learn how to park your breathing inside of a sentence. So we'll do a little test here. As you're reading a sentence and you come to a natural break point, you take a little inhale and then you continue reading. Right? All right. So here's my phrase. There's my breath. I parked it in the middle of the phrase. And if we play it back, as you're reading a sentence and you come to a natural break point, you take a little inhale and then you continue reading. Generally, that's fairly transparent. People don't notice that kind of breath because it's part of the rhythm of your speech, especially if you're doing it naturally and you're not making a big ragged inhale. But obviously, all your breaths can't be that way. And you will have natural breaths at the ends of phrases in between sections of a sentence. But what's a common problem is this, and let's do it. You read a really long section of audio and you keep reading and you don't take any breaths until you finish it, and then you get to the end and then you go into the next sentence. And you'll see it in the waveform. When you get to the point where your breaths are really obvious in the waveform like this, in between two big sections, do you see that? Here's my phrase ending, here's the next phrase, and you see this big swell in the waveform. When you see this repetitively in a section of narration, it's usually indicative that there's kind of a breathing issue. If it's constant like that and it's so huge in the waveform view. Now, one thing you can do to make sure that you understand when this is happening is a lot of DAWs will have what's called like a waveform scale. You can basically change. Let's go into one of these tracks to do it. You can change the scale of the waveform in the view. And I know that there are hotkeys for doing this in Reaper. I know there is in Studio One. There almost certainly are in most DAWs, and they tend to call it different things. I'm going to call it waveform scale for the sake of this. But if you maximize this scale, this will help you identify when your breaths are over loud. Because once you shrink it down, you can't see anything. Let's go into this one where we have see, if I shrink this down, I can't really tell that this is a really severe breath. But if you make sure that your scale is reasonably large so that you can see this, then you've got like a visual indicator that this is going on. So I recommend doing that. This also comes very handy for punching, because it's going to make sure that you don't punch in the middle of a breath. But we'll get to that. So the next technique I kind of want to talk about as far as minimizing these is to recognize when it's going to happen. You don't just have to punch when you make a mistake. You can also punch when you know you're going to make a mistake. And if that mistake is breathing too heavy, then you can choose to punch to avoid that mistake, right? So here's what happens. Here's what I tend to do when I know I'm not going to have enough breath to properly get into the next sentence without having to have a huge inhale or a slash breath. All right, so I'm reading this long phrase. I'm expending all of the breath that I have in my lungs, and I'm coming down to the end, and I know I'm not going to have enough to get into this next sentence, and then I hold it. And then I take a breath. I know I just used up all the juice I had. There's no way I can go into this next sentence without a really ugly breath. So I hold my breath at the end to make sure that I've got a nice clean section at the end of that phrase, sentence, and then I hold it. And now I can go into this next sentence with all the breath that I need, and I don't have to worry about punching into a breath that I took at the end, and I also don't have to worry about cleaning that up after the fact. It's just kind of a mindset. I know this is going to be too big of a breath. I know I can't go any further. Settle, stop, and then go back and do a nice clean punch. Because I think what a lot of people do is they read this. I'm reading and I run out of my breath and I went a little bit too long. And then I take a big breath and I start into the next thing and then I screw up because I didn't get enough breath. And it didn't sound right because I was rushed trying to inhale to make it into this phrase. And I know I'm going to have to punch. And now this is what I have to punch into, this mess. If you punch in the middle of this breath, you're going to get a break. Oops, I didn't do a punch. Let's do an actual punch here. I went a little bit too long, and then I try and punch in, and now this is what I've got. Long, and I got an inhale that gets cut. This is another, I think, common problem for a lot of narrators who are just starting out. They're doing a punch. Oh, I need to punch in, and it'll blend it. You can't cross blend this severe of a change in breath. So ensuring that you've got a nice clean place to punch in is just a key technique and saving you a lot of time and a lot of pain and saving your engineers time so they don't have to clear up this broken breath that ended at your punch point, right? Okay. Hopefully that's clear. Is that clear? Has anybody got any questions about how that works? Hopefully that's clear. All right. So one of the reasons that I use Audition is because I can repair things like this after they happen. In most DAWs, that's not possible. So you really kind of want to set yourself up for success in all of your punches, again, by managing your breath and making sure that you leave enough space to properly punch after these. Another, I think, common issue is punching too close to the previous phrase. While you're learning, if you have issues with this, and you may not, again, everybody's got a vast range of experience here, but if you are having issues with this, it's worth your time every few punches to go back and listen to your punch. If you're not in the habit of doing you just to make sure that what you did sounds clean. It's just good practice, especially when you are trying a new technique. Maybe you're trying holding your breath here, or you're trying to zero in on make sure that these punches are nice and clean. Go back and listen to them after you have done them. You don't have to do every one, but give yourself a little, sampling across the board to make sure that the punches really are sounding nice, that you don't have clicks and weirdness and stuff. One of the cool things about Audition, for those of you that use Audition, and I don't want to get too DAW specific here, is that in Audition, you can actually edit the waveform while you're doing the punches in a way that is easy to see. So, for instance, you can take room tone, and if you've got a bad breath, let's do it like this. I've got a bad breath here. I can actually clean that up by basically blending in room tone. I went a little bit too long. Now that breath is gone. So I went a little bit too long, and now I can do a clean punch. This is not going to be available in most DAWs, but for those of you who are using Audition, I know there are a few of you, and we can talk about this later on if you would like. You do have some ability to clean up some of these issues, even if you screwed up. For everybody else, for the most part, you just need to make sure that your punches are clean and that you're not introducing this kind of noise to deal with at these punch points. Now, one other thing I kind of want to talk a little bit about is mouth noise. I have an incredibly noisy mouth, and you're not going to be able to tell because I'm actually running a variant of my audiobook mastering stack on the audio that you're hearing right now. I do a real-time VST plugin stack. So I'm actually running RX Mouth Declick on this audio that you're listening to. So, but you can still see it in the audio that I record. There's some right there. You take a look. All these little It's nice to look in a spectral view because you can see what it is. These little vertical streaks like this, those are basically crackly sounds, mouth noise. All these little hot vertical streaks, especially high up here in the frequency range, are mouth noise. Um, if you do not own Isotope RX, the not the Elements version, but the actual normal version, which is not cheap, I realize, it's worth your time. It's worth your money to invest in, because it's incredibly effective just for one plugin alone, which is the RX 6, 7, and 8 mouth declick plugin. There is a declick plugin that comes in Isotope Elements and previous versions of the Isotope software, but it's garbage. It's very likely to make your audio sound kind of digital and watery, and the mouth declick is very, very, very tuned. Yeah, RX standard. I know there's like some other version, like Super Pro version. You don't need that, but standard has RX 6 and 7 and 8 mouth declick. From what I can tell, the plugin has not advanced in any significant way since RX 6. I think it's been reasonably static, so you don't have to have the latest raises. I'm still using RX 6, and it's magic. It's basically space magic. It will save you a huge amount of time. And I don't know, maybe this is an open secret, but you really don't know. For Pink Flamingo, I'm sure they're probably running this if you haven't, but when you submit anywhere else, you have no idea what people are going to do with your audio. You just don't know. RX mouth declick is very, very transparent. I have never felt that it ever corrupted my audio or made it sound digital because it's so specifically targeted. It's so situational to mouth noise. So it never seems to mess up any consonants or T's or D's as like any other declicking software does. It's just great. I use the default settings. I don't fiddle with them at all. They work great. I have tried them on any number of people's audio. I have never felt the need to tweak them. You know, there's a certain amount of mouth noise that shows up. People are listening to this stuff in the most garbage compressed format ever, but all the big ticket stuff, it's just going to take care of. If you do not have this piece of software, and maybe it's expensive for you not right now, wait for sale and get it. It's great. And I've never, I have never regretted a purchase less. It's fabulous. The other thing that you will get if you've got RX is, well, I'm going to switch over here. So I'm going to go to a desktop view, which is going to give you a hall of mirrors for a second. Sorry about that. And I'm going to pull up the editor. We're looking at the spectral view here in Adobe Audition. The other thing that you get, if you have the actual Isotope RX software, is the ability to do the kinds of cleanup and view things in a spectral view that you also have in Audition or whatever. And it's pretty valuable, especially if you're dealing with things like road noise and you need to be able to see this stuff. It has a lot of tools for cleaning it up. This is really not a Q&A on using Isotope. There's a bunch of stuff we could talk about, but it's maybe a little bit much for this. But you get this with it too, which will end up being valuable for you, I'm almost positive. All right, I'm going to switch back. I'm going to try and switch back without giving you a hall of mirrors for too long. All right, now we're back. Great. Yeah, what are my settings? I use, pull it up here, mouth declick. I use the default settings, which are 6 and 2. And I've never felt the need to do more. It's great on the default settings. And I'm really mouth clicky. Like, it's like a forest fire in there most of the time. So, all right. What should we talk about next? Why don't we ask a few, let's see what people have for questions. I think there might have been one earlier here that I just didn't see. Let's see. Bum-ba-dum-ba-dum. Maybe not. We talked about the settings. And Sarah's in here. Sarah, are there other really common audio issues that are coming your way that you want to talk about, or that you want me to address, or kind of try and point people in the right direction on? Low pass. So this is always dicey to talk about. Um, like I said, I like my audio to be at a point where somebody can just master it and be done. Just about every I find it hard to believe that any audio engineers out there are not going to do a low pass on the audio after you get it, but I still do it ahead of time. um, One thing also that doing a low pass does is it will actually eliminate a lot of plosives. Just running a low pass, there's a certain amount of popped P's and whatever that will actually just disappear with a low pass, because a lot of what makes those happen is low frequency noise. It's this pump of low frequency noise. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Um, but this is kind of a little bit tricky to talk about, because if you do this and you submit the audio don't and you don't do it with full knowledge of what you're doing, you you can mangle your audio to the point where you're losing essential parts of your voice, right? If you low pass too. So here's what a low pass is. A low pass is basically um, it's basically something that prevents audio below a certain frequency from being recorded effectively. Um, and I don't actually use mine as a low pass when I record. So I use something called I use an Apollo interface, which allows you to put plugins on the actual device that happens before the audio even gets to your PC. And what I use is what's called a downward expansion, which basically what's the best way of saying what a downward expander, an expander basically increases the dynamic range of audio, but what it basically is doing is it squishes down things at the low end of the frequency. um, so that's how I remove most low frequency stuff. Also, the Apollo has something called a low cut, which softly cuts off stuff. What is Apollo's low cut? I don't remember what frequency range it's at. I'm trying to see where it's at. There's one just built into the hardware. And some microphones also have a low pass built in. They'll have like a switch on the back that, or I'm sorry, I'm saying low pass here. It's a high pass filter. It's a low cut, high pass. Everything high passes. Um, Sorry, I've got my terminology juggled around there. I read low pass, but it's really a high pass. Um, we're covering a lot of stuff here. I want to make sure I'm not missing a bunch of questions. JS asked, do I process my raw audio before sending it in? I use mouth declick, yes. So I use mouth declick for every submission, and I've never had a complaint. So I don't use compression. I don't use I don't do a bunch of fancy stuff, but I do use a mouth declick. It's the one thing that I do. Because publishers like Tantor won't necessarily do it at all. And for a lot of publishers, they're just going to farm out your engineering to contract engineers, and you have no idea what those engineers will do. Not a clue. It won't be consistent from book to book in a series. It's just going to be given to somebody. And a lot of them don't use mouth declicker. And again, my mouth is a forest fire, so I use it. It's kind of just sort of an open secret, I think. Mouth declick is magic. All right. I'm going to make sure I didn't miss any other questions here. James was asking about what frequency I use for my cutoff. I'm going to try and look this up real quick. Apollo twin high pass button. What does this do? I don't remember what it does. Pass. Okay. It looks like it's 75 hertz is is what the Apollo Twins low cut slash high pass is. So I just use it. And I've got construction going on over here. They're building a bunch of houses off near my house. And also, since it's been a year of kids being home from school, my kids tromp around upstairs, and it's basically just a lifesaver. um, Again, I'm a little leery to just broadly advocate doing this because you can do a low cut at a frequency that's going to savage your voice, especially depending on your voice. It is to a certain extent voice specific. How deep is your voice? So I don't want to advocate any hard and fast rules on that. Let's see what else we got here. Scott asks, on declicker, please transcribe to number you referenced as 6 on a scale of 1 to 100. It's just got a slider, and let's see what it has. I'm going to pull this up. Effects, or RX6, mouth declick. The slider goes up to 10, but 6 is the default. And what Don was saying, 5.5. Somebody was mentioning that I think Don Barnes was recommending a 5.5. Again, I've done 100 and something books with it just on the default settings and never felt that it was bad. And on anybody else's audio I've ever tried it on, and on all the audio we did for the last game I made, which was like, I don't know how many actors, 40 actors. All of the audio I ran it on with default settings, and I never felt that it corrupted the audio in any meaningful way that anyone would be able to detect. So. All right, just checking for other questions. What's another good thing to talk about here? Some of these start to get kind of specific. If we're talking about like audio, I don't know how much we want to talk about audio repair, because in general, I kind of want to advocate for you not fixing audio so much as just having it clean from the get-go, so that you don't need to be in a position where you're listening back through your audio to try and fix things. You kind of want to fix them as they happen, because as a narrator, you don't have time to go listen to this. You don't have to go time to listen to all your audio for dogs, right? You need to be recording the next book. So I really kind of mostly advocate repairing stuff at the point of occurrence by repunching and just moving on. Especially since there's such a wide variety of DAWs, and so many of them don't necessarily have good waveform editing or repair capabilities. So the audio, I'll just tell you the audio that I send out. Here's the raw audio that I send. I mean, I'm recording the raw audio that I send. This is what we're looking at here. This is the raw audio that I send, and you'll notice that you don't see. Here's a way I'll show you how this works. Let's just record. We're recording, hooray. I'm going to turn off this is the difference between the built-in hardware high pass and no hardware high pass. And you can see that you get kind of this band of low frequency noise. This is most audio that is submitted. It looks like this. Actually, it probably looks hotter than this down below. Most people have their mic does not have a low cut button. Their interface doesn't have a low cut button, and there's just a certain amount of low frequency noise in the world. I mean, I'm in a booth. I'm in a Studio Bricks. It's a triple walled Studio Bricks, and I've got a downward expander running. And I still have low frequency noise. It's not particularly audible or intrusive low frequency noise, but that's kind of what it looks like. And for almost every mastering stack that an engineer is going to run on stuff, they are going to cut this out. They're going to run a high pass and a low pass. High pass means that everything above the frequency cutoff is allowed to pass through, and everything below it gets removed. And a low pass means that everything below the frequency cutoff is allowed to pass through, and everything above it gets cut off. So the high pass, or low cut, removes this band of low frequency down here, and the the low pass high cut removes frequencies up in this really extremely high range. Um, so for all um, audiobook mastering, you generally want those off. You don't want rumbly stuff coming in the speakers because it muds up the audio, and there's nothing usable up there in the high frequency range. People don't speak up there. So, problem with punching in too close. Neil's asking, what's the problem with punching in too close? So the problem with punching in too close is that often you can't tell that there is some audio, maybe the last bit of a sibilant or the trail off of a consonant ending T or D that you can't see in the waveform view. That is audio that you want to keep, that you're accidentally going to cut off. And the other problem is that whatever cross-blending settings you might have for the punch, because almost all punches have a certain amount of softening, where it transitions from the previous audio to the next audio over a tenth or a 20th or a half a second. It depends on the DAW and it depends on the settings that can also blend out some of the trailing audio. So if you ended on, let's say we ended on a T, and we're saying something and we end on a T sound, right? We got this T sound. If you punch too close to this, you're going to lose some of this in the transition between the two. And when you do, it's going to make it sound unnatural. And unless you want to listen back to every single one of these all the time, you want to give yourself enough space to where that blend is going to be natural. And it's never going to impact the audio that came before it. If you're really careful, and you are aware of what sounds are being made, you can punch tight. But again, there's a little bit of DAW specificity depending on how the punching works. Hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. Recording pickups and the tone doesn't match. Okay. Oh, and Suzanne asked about D's and T's getting cut off. It's most likely the regular D-click. The regular D-click is really bad about... So Susanna asked if the D's and T's are getting cut off, it's most likely due to regular D-click instead of mouth D-click. And in general, I found that to be the case. The original D-click is really bad about muddying up D's and T's on the ends of sentences. And it's one of the great things about mouth D-click. It's so much better about not doing that. Scott asks about gating. Don't gate. So a noise gate, basically what a noise gate does is it records dead air if usually if the volume is below a certain level, and then you just have dead space. Dead space sounds unnatural. You want room tone. You don't want a gate. So when you gate, you basically end up with something that looks like... Let's make it a big chunk of audio here. So... All right, so you see all this, hopefully you can see it in the stream, all this purple mess down here, all this kind of like staticky data in this low frequency is room tone. This is what my room sounds like. If I were to up the volume a lot, it would sound like a hiss. So let's jack the volume up on this. Let's make it really loud. That's what it sounds like, but incredibly quiet. So what a gate would do is basically make this sound like nothing at all. There would be nothing there. It would be totally black in the frequency view. There'd just be no data. And that sounds usually pretty unnatural. So we don't like to use gates. And in general, when we're trying to push down just room tone, let's say your room is just noisy, it's just a little hissy, or you're recording really hot, so you have a really prominent room tone. The way that we resolve that was something called like a downward expander. And the easiest way I can think of to explain this is just imagine it's like almost taking a balloon. If you could put a balloon here and you slowly inflated that balloon, and as that balloon inflated, it pushed the frequencies out from the center here. That's kind of what a downward expander does, except it's only going down. And there's lots of elements to that, what frequencies it starts to expand below, but the idea is that it squashes this low frequency noise um, downward. You don't want to use a gate. Don't use one. That's just don't use a gate. And in general, unless you know what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing a downward expander either. That's something that the engineer will do. But don't gate. Yes, don't gate. All right. I had a question up here, and it was about, this was the one I don't want to remove. Mary was asking about recording pickups where there's no tone match. A lot of this is just practice. At the simplest level, reading over what you read before, especially if you have headphones, playing back what you already read and reading over it, over the top of it, so you can hear yourself doubled while you're reading back with what is being played back. Do that a few times to get into the rhythm of it, and to also check your distance, because your distance from it, and just there's so many elements to how you're pitching your voice and how you're delivering a line. Practice reading what you already read and trying to make it sound identical first, and then do your variant. From a pure technique standpoint, that's a good way to kind of get in the mindset of the previous read to make sure that you're going to match up. I go a lot further than that, but it's hard for me to give you a broad way to do that, because of the way I do pickups is very specific to the DAW that I use. And when I do pickups, I do them in a sub-syllable level, so I replace as little of the audio as humanly possible. But that's hard to do without specific tools, so I don't really want to broadly advocate that. But the simplest is read back several times over what you already read while listening to it in headphones until you feel that you're matching the intensity and the pitch. And you should be able to get a sense, if you've got your headphones on, of how close you are to the mic and the presence that it's got as you're listening back to what you've already recorded. And then do your pickup once you kind of got it slotted in. Hopefully that answers the question. If it doesn't, though, let me know. JS asks if your room tone is measured by your peak level or your average RMS. I mean, your RMS is a measure of the overall loudness of the whole thing. So, it's not really your RMS. Let's see here. You can measure the RMS of your room tone. So I can, like, for instance, select this section and I can scan it, and my RMS in this area is negative 90 decibels. But in general, hopefully your room tone just isn't intrusive. But again, you've probably done already samples that have been submitted, and your room tone is already past muster for an engineer to be able to deal with it. If they're going to use a downward expander on it, they can do that. Once you've passed muster, try not to stress out about it too much unless something new is impacting your room tone, like the air conditioner kicking on, or the lawnmower outside, or, whatever, the heater. Hopefully that answers those. Let's see. I do have a video on doing the pickups and kind of the subsyllable replacements. It's on my YouTube, and I can post that later, or you can ping me about it if you want. But it's very specific to audition because it relies on being able to see a spectral view. If you're using something like RX, you can kind of get used to how things look in a spectral view. It's really very easy to pick out breaks in a word in a spectral view. You see this waveform, and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. But here, punching into this is a T, right? And you can see this very percussive start to the T. And this is an S. This is a sibilant. You can tell because it's got this kind of big wash of yellow up here at this frequency range, and it has kind of like this soft look. Punching into, so it's like this is ch, but let's do a s. Go into this next segment. There's a segment. S. And then you can tell for all your consonants, they'll have this sharp percussive section and then a trail off. Um, yeah. Let's see, what are we talking about here? Yeah, having a minimal amount for an engineer to do. I When I give pickups back, I want them to be able to paste them in and they don't have to do anything but paste them in. That's it. I don't want them to have to try and match them or fiddle with the volume or anything. So when I do a pickup, I try to do it actually with most of the original audio of the phrase, but it takes a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of experience to be able to do. And frankly, it requires a certain amount of familiarity with the tools and the ability to kind of see and fine tune that stuff, which is probably beyond the scope of this this Q&A to talk about. But I did do a video on it that goes into some detail. So, all right, what other kind of questions we got? Boom, boom, boom. We can talk about whatever at this point, right? Because we've covered the basics. And if any of you have questions about specific stuff beyond this, feel free to ping me. I'm always up for talking about anything. I'm a nerd. So, if you got a problem that you're struggling with or that you need a little advice on where to look, heads and tails. Oh, for audio. So I like to always send my audio with the proper heads and tails already done. I know a lot of people don't. Um, and what I mean by heads and tails is the sections of room tone before the chapter header, at the end, and between the chapter header and the start of a chapter, assuming there is a chapter header. And so what I have is I have little files stored. Let me pull them up. I have got them already at the right length. So let's see, I've got a chapter tone and an end tone and a chapter front tone. So I have an opening bit of room tone, which is 0.49 seconds long. And after I have recorded some audio for a chapter, I will paste that at the front. So I have my front tone and I have an end tone, which is 4 seconds long of my raw room tone. And I will paste that at the end. And I also have a section that's, what is it? 2 seconds long from chapter header to start of chapter. Let's see. What do I look for during a prep read? Trying to decide how much I want to advocate prep reading like I prep read. I do a light read. It's a skim. I like to pretty much be live reading stuff. So what I do here's the steps for my prep. And I do a lot of fantasy. I'm not sure, I don't think that my prep read, and I do pretty much exclusively fiction. I don't do nonfiction at all. So I don't spend a lot of time doing research on like medical terms or anything. I'm mostly looking for weird words that I have to get pronunciation on. So the first thing I will do as part of a prep read is take whatever document that I've got. If it's a PDF, I convert it to Word. If it's Word, I bring it into Word, and I do a spell check. And that finds 90% of the made-up words and strange names that I need to know for getting pronunciation questions answered from a rights holder. So that's my first step. And then I do a skim read, which is a very fast read where I'm looking for all of the characters, where they are introduced. I keep a list of those characters. I get whatever character traits they have. I also have a set of keywords that I look for and search for things like accent, brogue, drawl, and all of this other stuff that I use to find out if people have accents that I need to know about. And then I create myself a quick document that has a list of all the main characters, any pronunciation. I make my initial kind of like phonetic guess pronunciations for anything that is weird. And then I will send those to the rights holder and get their verification or, their alternate pronunciation back. And I'll know the shape of the narrative and I'll know all the characters and I'll know what they sound like and who I think they are, but I don't deep read. So my prep usually lasts about an hour. Let's see. Let me go back up here real quick so that I'm not going too far off. Roberto asked, when do you think is the best time to record? Morning, noon, or burning the midnight oil? As far as I know, everybody's pretty different. I like to record in the morning. I don't really care how my voice sounds in the morning because I already have kind of a slightly raspy voice, so I don't worry about it too much. I like to have talked a little bit before I read. But I'm also a little more cobwebby in the morning. I usually have a little more dust to knock out of my lungs. But you know, I like to work a regular schedule, so I record usually from 9 to 11:30 in the morning and like 1:30 to 3:34 in the afternoon. And I target 2.5 to 3 finished hours a day, and that's my schedule. But a lot of people are part time. When I wasn't doing this full time, I was doing it in the evenings whenever I could. So I don't know if it matters that much. Um, John asks, so you submit raw that has been proofed, edited, and heads and tails done. I do not send proofed audio um, for raw audio. So I I am I don't edit for pauses and breaths, but I do put on the heads and tails. I record such that I don't have to go touch the audio again. And I think that's generally the goal that you want to have. That when you punched in, you are punching in and reading with the pacing that you want in the final audio, that you shouldn't have an expectation that an engineer is going to come up and change your pacing. I don't want an engineer to touch my pacing at all because it's part of the performance as far as I'm concerned. So from my perspective, you should not expect anyone to change your breaths or your pauses. Those are part of the performance, and the choices that you made are the ones that you should be stuck with. So if you're not happy with those choices, you should alter them while you are recording. As far as proofing goes, you're going to do pickups, somebody else is going to do the proof. But I don't listen back to my audio and do those kinds of edits. I do put on heads and tails, which is because I feel like it's polite. So the series of events that I expect for my audio is that I will record it. The pacing will be set. There will be no weird breaths, and that any errors in the audio are going to be me just misreading something and not knowing I did it. They will be errors that there's no way I'm aware of. It'll be sent off. It'll be proofed. I will make those fixes, and then they will run a mastering stack, and that will be it for the audio. That's the ideal for me. When I do full production, and I do a lot of full production because I work for a lot of indie authors and small publishers, and I also do not listen back because I edit as I go effectively. When my audio is done, if there's anything weird, my proofer is going to tell me about it. So I pretty much just run the stack on it, and that's it. I run it through second opinion and make sure that it meets ACX audio specs, and I'm finished. So I have a really I don't advocate the way that I do things because it's really, really DAW and software and experience specific. But I have a pretty tight I have a pretty tight ratio just because I'm really impatient. All right. Even asked about saving character voice files. So if you're doing stuff with a lot of characters, it's a good idea, especially if you're in a series, because then otherwise, 2 years from now, or even later in the book, you're going to have to remember how somebody sounds. So if you're doing a book with a lot of characters in it, and especially if they're not part of like your mental list of character actors that you just know how to voice immediately, definitely it's worth, when you first encounter one of those characters, saving off a voice sample. Oftentimes for books where I know I've got a lot of specific characters that need to be done a specific way, I'll actually do the voice samples ahead of time because I'll have my character list. And often the way that I figure out what a character sounds like is to take some of their dialogue, because what's the kind of the pacing of their dialogue? Are they slangy? Are they snarky? Or whatever? So I usually have some like text excerpt that like identifies what that character is. So I'll just read that out and save it ahead of time. And sometimes I'm in a position where I'm working with an author and I need to get approval from them on a characterization. Or I mean, I don't have to, but I like the authors to be happy with what I'm doing. So I'll do that back and forth, and then I've got that sample. Audible has gotten so Scott says you've cut your intro to 0.8 seconds. My intro is 0.49. You mean like the intro room tone? I use 0.49 because I think I haven't looked back at the specs in a long time. It's I haven't changed any of this in like years. But I've never had anything rejected by ACX for this stuff. So let's see. Anything else I'm missing here? Dun, dun, dun. What else have we got? All right. 1 to 1.5, Mike says. Are you talking about the space between the chapter or before the chapter header? I use 0.49. Chapter tone, front raw. Yep, 0.49. I've used 0.49 on every every book, like 100 books. The thing is, there's always a certain amount of slop before your first syllable because it kind of blends in. So what's second opinion say? Okay. Yeah, second opinion has 0.5 as the minimum head, max head of 0.75. Mine basically ends up working out that way, I think, because of the way they measure it. It's tight enough that it's basically. So look, let's give an example here. Chapter 1. So if I take my front tone, where is this? Chapter 1, and I paste this in here, there's 0.5 and there's 0.49. And then there's this much space just in the lead into a syllable. Janelle asks, do you have more than one monitor in your booth? Nope, I have one monitor and then I have an iPad that I read off of. I can't fit 2 monitors in my booth. I wish I could. I like having multiple monitors, but yeah, just the one. Just the one. I also live read actually I have 2 iPads in my booth. One of them is for Discord though, because I live read pretty much every day. So it's how I see my chat when I'm interacting with people while I'm narrating. But that's pretty non-standard. Anyway, use 0.5 for your intro. I have my file is 0.49 whatever. But it works out to 0.4, 0.5. Oh, actually, yeah. Actually, I take that back. It's 0.499. So that's why. I'm just reading the top header wrong. It's 0.4999. Which is probably why it's never been rejected. Any other questions that we want to talk about? If you want to talk about weird stuff now, we've kind of covered all the bases. If you want to talk about weird stuff, we can talk about weird stuff. If you got specific kind of stuff. So basically 0.5. 0.4999999. I mean, I use second opinion. So if you are not using second opinion, well, here's the thing. Second opinion is primarily for full production audio. So it's going to check RMS and other stuff. So I'm always running my audio through this so I know it meets the specs because I'm constantly mastering and submitting audio. If you are in a position where every master audio, it's a good way to make sure. If you are If you're submitting this for raw, you're close enough. Don't give permission to talk about weird stuff. Have I ever had audio that got corrupted with no reason why? I've had audio that got corrupted, but there was a reason why. I've never had any with no reason. The reason has either been there was an issue with the interface, so that it was corrupted during recording because either like the buffer was not big enough for the audio and the USB was not consuming the audio fast enough to feed the buffer, or there was some bug. Or I've had issues where in Audition there has been a crash, and there have been cases where it gets junked. But those are relatively rare. James is asking, do you record each chapter as a separate project file, or do you record the whole book in a single track? I record as project files because I'm risk averse. Especially when you're doing punch and roll and it's effectively a bunch of individual clips that can be moved in a timeline. I know that I'm a fumble fingers, and I have been known to accidentally drag things. So I like to be in a position where I can't accidentally 4 days later drag a track from something I recorded 3 days ago. I like backups. So when I record every chapter, as soon as the chapter is complete, I immediately burn down a wave of it. I export a wave the moment of the chapter is complete. So I have my multi-track punched audio, I have a wave copy of it, and of course I have all of the individual waves that came with it. I'm just super risk averse. Also, the more clips you've got live, the more likely your the more likely your DAW is to poop out. I've written software for 20 something years. I don't trust software. So I'm risk averse. That's why. Mandy asks, if my audio starts randomly skipping, is it your computer, mic, or cable? Well, it totally depends. Is it skipping in playback, or is it skipping during the recording? And then, oh, well, while I'm waiting for Mandy to answer that, I'll answer your next question. Did you answer? You may have, what decibel do I record? And you mean, how loud do I record? It's really kind of specific. That ends up being really specific to your interface and your microphone. What I have ended up doing, I have recorded at different volumes over the years, for different reasons. Depending on the mic and the space. I record louder than I used to now, but the reason I record louder is because I also am using an Apollo where I can do some downward expansion. I use a lot of dynamic range because I do a lot of really shouty books and a lot of things with a lot of weird voices. And so I need more dynamic range for that. So I used to have to record a good bit quieter. Now that I'm using an Apollo and I do a certain amount of pre-processing on the audio stream, I can record a little bit louder so that my default is louder without clipping. And so I don't think it's that important, really. You can record pretty quiet. You know, the audio data that you've got is detailed enough that the volume can be changed on it without it really messing up the audio, except in some extreme circumstances. Mandy doesn't use headphones, but I know your audio is amazing, Mandy. You don't need to use headphones. You don't need to worry about all those noises. I'm just advocating using headphones for people who know they're going to have to contend with weird noises coming up all the time that they know are polluting their audio. Beyond that, I don't want to be in the battle of whether you use headphones or not. I like them. I think they're great. John is asking if Second Opinion is wave files only. It might do FLACs too. Let me see. It will do waves, FLACs, and AIFs. But again, Second Opinion is really for fully mastered audio, is what it's designed for. Is that it's going to pass ACX submission specs. So if you're submitting raw, it's going to fail you. It's going to fail you. Because your RMS is probably not going to be in range. But if you just need a safety checkup that your heads and tails are the right lengths, you can use it and just ignore any errors about the RMS. It'll basically give you contextual errors for all the things that it finds wrong with your audio. So if you just want to check your heads and tails, you can definitely do that with Second Opinion, and then just ignore anything about RMS. Mandy asks, do you put your gain higher and record at half volume on your DAW, or record at lower gain and put your mic on your DAW higher? So my DAW does not have a recording volume control. It just takes whatever the interface gives it. So the only volume control that I have is on my interface. Or at least maybe there is buried in Audition something where you can mess with your input audio, but I don't do that. I just want one knob to twiddle, and I never touched it after I got it set up right. I put it where I wanted it, and I never touch it again. So what I did was when I was originally tuning it, was I just sat here and talked while I was recording and dialed the volume in, and I went through the range of kinds of voices that I know I do. You know, when I have to do a false shout or when I need to do a whisper, and I just watched the waveform and tuned it in. Yeah. So that's how I originally tuned and I just spent a while messing with it and making sure I was happy with it. But yeah. If you want to have different twiddly knobs, you totally can. If as James says, Studio One allows you to do an input volume control, and I assume honestly there's got to be something buried in Audition where you can do it, where you can tweak the inputs somewhere, but I've never done it, and I'm not sure that there's a point to doing it. I don't know if you need 2 control points for that. One's enough. It's not like you get anything out of adjusting it in 2 places, as far as I know. Except potentially accidentally, clipping it after the fact if you're increasing the volume, unless the format it's saving it in is preserving audio past the clip. Let's see what else we got here. Bum, bum. Trying to think about other cool stuff to talk about. I mean, I can talk about nerdy stuff forever, but it starts to get really, really specific. If it were me, I would just leave your computer at whatever the default is, which would be 100%. I mean, that's what I'm doing, and then only twiddling the knob. John asks, does my right holder or author ever disagree with my character choices? I mean, I always try and make sure that we're on the same page up front. So here's how if I have an author that I have interaction with and I'm doing character notes, usually what I do, unless they already have a list for me, and occasionally they do, I give them basically my mental movie cast. Here's who I would cast in the movie for the voice, and I send that to them. And if they disagree, they let me know, and I say, okay, well, how about this? Maybe they have somebody specific in mind. If I disagree, then I may try and give them another option and give a reason why. Let's say, here's an example. A book has 2 comedy relief characters, and the author wants them to both be British. They're not from Great Britain. They're fantasy characters or whatever, and he wants them to both be British. I might advocate for one not to be, so that we make sure that we have enough disparity between those choices, and that would be the reasoning I would give for why I would do that. But I just have a dialogue with the author and figure it out. I've never had a case where we've had some intractable difference that is not surmountable. My favorite color, Mandy, is probably purple. Suzanne asks, how long have I been using the Apollo? I have been using it for... Time has lost all meaning now, but I feel like it's 4 or 5 months. Before the Apollo, I was using an Audient, which I like. I like the way the Audient sounds a lot. Um, but after I moved and I knew that the kids were going to be home all the time upstairs, and after the construction started, I was like, I'm not going to deal with this low frequency noise. So I wanted to have something that had a low cut in hardware so that I was always, what I was hearing didn't include that low frequency noise, because since I record in headphones, when I hear a low frequency noise, I stop because I don't want it in the audio. And it would probably be cut out later by a software low cut, but it was interrupting me. So I was constantly stopping, like, oh, somebody's stomping, or oh, this sound is happening. So when I remove it further upstream, it means that I don't hear it, so I don't stop recording for something I don't need to stop recording for. And that was really, really valuable to me. The other thing I have is I have a limiter compressor. And I don't want to advocate anybody using compressors before, but the reason I have it is it only does compression if the volume crosses like -4 decibels. So it does absolutely nothing to my audio, but if it's just about to clip, it starts to squish it. Which for me, because I have so much yelly stuff, prevents me from clipping on stuff that's right on the borderline. I mean, I can still be loud where it sounds like crap because the compression is overdone, but I have to stop less for loud stuff. Um, anyway, I love it. I'm on a Windows PC, and it is way fiddlier to set up an Apollo Twin on a Windows PC through USB. It's a pain in the butt, and there's lots of pitfalls. If you're on a Mac, I think it's just much more straightforward. So I love it, but it was a pain in the butt setup. Let's see. Somebody was asking something audition specific back here, and I think I skipped over it. One check, let me check. This may have been to audition specific, I think was what it said. Al was asking earlier, and I don't know if Al is still here, but he said his spectral display looks different than mine. I don't know what my settings are. There is you can choose to make it more or less logarithmic, and you can make it logarithmic or linear. And so it's probably just has to do with that setting, because you can scale this like this, and you can also make it more linear or more logarithmic. And then there's something called increase and decrease spectral resolution. That basically, it's just how the data is displayed. I think mine are pretty default. It's possible you just twiddled something. Allison was asking about, for using Adobe Audition but want to learn more, is there a coach you can suggest? Uncle Roy is probably the de facto Adobe Audition coach guy. So, and there's James saying the same thing 2 lines later. So, concur. If you have quick questions, I'm always happy to answer them. So feel free to prod me about it. I've done a bunch of videos on using Audition too, and I wrote the punch and roll extension. So let's see. What headphones and mic do I use? Janelle's asking, what headphones and mic do I use? These are Bayer Dynamic DT 770s. Is that right? Yeah, DT 770 Pros. I think 85 ohm. They're incredibly comfortable, and I wear them all day and have for years. There are also nice thing about these, apart from the fact that they're incredibly comfortable and high quality and sound really good, is that they're completely modular, which means you can replace every part of them if they fail. So you can have the same pair for a very long time. The little ear pads can be replaced. The straps can be replaced. You can buy the parts for them if something starts to fail. They're really great, and they're very comfortable. And I just changed these ear pads this year because, God, they were gross after 3 years of use. My mic is, I use a Mojave MA201 FET. I've been through a few mics, and this is the one I like the most for my voice. It's a good general mic, and I think Amanda Rose Smith, this is what she's got in her studio as a good, it's a really good general mic. It has a nice warm sound. At various times I've used a Rode NT1A. I think that was my starter mic, which was a good starter mic, but was a little harsh for my voice. And I tried a Neumann TLM 103, but it was way too bright for my voice. And I had the tube version of this, which is the Mojave MA200, but it's just too much of a pain in the butt to maintain. It's really humidity sensitive. So, um, yeah, I'm not a Mac guy. Macs are bad. Sorry. I've used a Mac. I have a Mac. It's upstairs, but I don't like them. That's fine though. It doesn't matter. What did I use before Audition? Nothing. I've always used Audition. Because I also use Photoshop and Premiere, I already have the Adobe suite, and I still prefer it to everything else because it interacts with all those other programs, and it has excellent spectral editing capability, which frankly, absolutely no other DAW does. No other DAW has as good of a spectral editing capability. Isotope RX standalone is the only thing that gets close, and I still think Adobe's is superior, and the ability to have both at the same time and to be able to do proper waveform editing in conjunction with multitrack for clips is also something that absolutely nothing else has. So personally, I think Audition is, I literally could not produce the books the way that I produce books in any other software package. It's literally impossible. So I use them for that reason. I do probably 60% of the books I do are full production books, and my editing and mastering time for an entire book is probably around 20 minutes because of the way I record and edit as I go. So my ratio for final audio is probably about an hour and 45 minutes for 1 hour of finished audio, roughly, which is really low. And there's no other way I could do it. So that's why I like Adobe Audition. But I don't expect anybody else to use it. And most people don't do full production in the way that I do for as many people, I don't think. Mandy's asking, why is my mic placement exactly like that? So what I did, I have the pretty good adjustable swing arm, and I literally just sat here and left the recording live and talked into it and listened to it in my headphones until it sounded the way I want. It was about the distance I want, and I checked my volumes. And you can move around. People are really, really picky about mic placement. I don't think it's worth as much worry as people tend to give it. I move a lot. So I move all over the place. I'm moving right now. I'm over here, I'm up here, whatever. In the heat of recording, I don't think it matters that much. It's very important when matching audio for a specific phrase, but unless you're using like a shotgun mic, which has a very, very, narrow pattern, a lot of these cardioid mics, you got a pretty good amount of play here, and I'm not super worried about it. It's mostly getting the distance right so that I'm not hitting plosives, and so that it's also just out of my line of sight so I can actually read my copy. That's probably my biggest pain in the butt. It was getting my pop screen so that it doesn't make my eyes bleed trying to look at my copy. Danielle asks, to clarify an earlier question, you send a character worksheet with choices in addition to a sample to the right holders? I do not. So I work with a wide variety of rights holders. Some of them have a author who wants to be very involved and has very strong opinions from the get-go. Like, it's really variable. So some authors will already have a sheet with their ideal like movie cast. I think this guy is like Elijah Wood. I think this lady is like Keira Knightley. Whatever. They already have a really strong mental image, and to me, that's really great. I want the author to be happy as long as it's something I can do, and I don't think that doing it will subvert what they're trying to pull off. Like, I can't do this. This voice is not someone I can do, or this voice will clash with this other voice when they're in conversation. But if there's an issue, then I'll talk to them about that. A lot of authors I never get to contact at all. But the ones that care and that are in a position to hear back from me, I usually only do audio samples if they request them. After a certain point in time, after you've done a certain number of books in a genre too, people kind of know what you're like. So a lot of the work I get is for the kind of books that I've done before, and they kind of already know what I sound like. So they're not really worried about it. So it's just really specific. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes an author really wants to hear just these two characters. This is the one they really, this is their favorite character, or this is the funny character, or whatever, and they're really particular about it. And I'm always happy to do an audio sample and adjust. Usually it's something like I thought they should be younger, or I thought they should be older, or something like that. And that's really easy to accommodate for the most part. So I do that. Um, Suzanne asked if Adobe Audition is Mac friendly. Yeah, yeah. Um, it works fine on Mac. All of Adobe's stuff pretty much works fine on Mac. What about accents? James asked, what about accents? Do a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. Do you make accents up? I always base them on an existing accent to some extent. I mean, it's just how sloppy I want to be with it. As far as I'm concerned, most accents in use in books are idiolects anyway. Nobody speaks the same anywhere, so I usually try and base them off of. In my head, most of them are based off of actors, so. But I don't like come up with some accent that's never been heard before because I think that's usually probably disturbing to people. Because then they just want to figure out what the accent is. Yeah, sometimes it is really Roberto says sometimes it's cool when they match up when your cast list matches up with an author, and sometimes it's really obvious too. And it's kind of like a haha, I figured it out. Oh yeah, accent is just part of a. Mandy's asking if you using expression and personality versus just differing in accent. Yeah, accent is just part of a character as far as I'm concerned. I think character is mostly physical, honestly. It's like how you hold your face and how you hold your body and just kind of delivery style. I can't remember Martin Short's accent from Father of the Bride. Let's see. Am I missing any questions? Are there any questions that I missed back here? I feel like I went back and got them all. Let's see. Maybe I should just pull up. I could probably quickly pull up a raw. All right. Let me do that. Let's see. So this is a raw submission to Tantor. I'm going to try and zoom in and look at it. And you can see that it's got clean room tone, already pre-spaced. Clean room tone at the end. And if you look at the waveform, you'll see that you're not going to see any big sharp breaths in between any of these phrasings. All the breaths are going to be, for the most part, mid-sentence like this. You can see this here. That's a breath. That's a breath. That's a breath. They all get parked in a phrase. And there's generally nothing interrupting in any of these intervening spaces. And I didn't go back and mess with this. This is just how it's been recorded. So that's generally what I aim for. Feels like we're running down here. Everybody's got their questions answered as much as we're going to answer them. And again, if you've got other questions, feel free to direct message me. I'll answer anything I can. Or if you run into any specific problems. Seems like a good stopping spot. I'm not seeing any other questions come our way, so why don't we wrap it up? If we have other kinds of specific things we want to go through later, we can always do another live session. But hopefully there was some useful info in here. Again, feel free to ask me about anything anytime. And have a fabulous Wednesday evening.